again, for chapter 4, you just basically are going to continue from chapter 3. You're just going to be adding more animations to what you've done started. So you're going to be adding like frame by frame animation, motion path, um, animated text, and some morphing and shape tweening. Okay, so we'll look at some of the stuff other students have done in terms of those type of things. To start with, let's see here. This is chapter 3. No, we don't want that one. Let's look at this one right here. So the student, again, created the opening page, which you guys have done already. Click animation, and then remember you had the sample animation page, right? That you went to in the sample animation page. And once in the sample animation page, you chapter 3, you only had the tween animation. So we clicked on the tween animation. This person did something like that. Now, remember we talked about at the end of this animation, we could either have it go back, loop back to frame 1 or frame 2 or something, or we can stop it at this point, and then the user would have to click on the home button, and it brings it back to the animation, the first opening page, right? So they would click back in here, and so on. In this case, then again, you're going to basically add these things that I talked about: frame by frame, animation, shape, tween, morphing, and so on. So when you click on there, there's her frame by frame animation. And this time she has a button going back to sample animation, which again you may want to do. What happens in this situation, as you can see, it stops at that last frame by frame animation. So there's a stop action there. And then you have a button available to you. And then you have a button set up so that when you click on it, in this case, it goes back to, in her case, would be frame 2 or the sample animation page. And you have the animated text type stuff, the motion path, which follows a path right there. Some shape tweening. Notice it changes shape from one thing to another. Morphing basically morphs into one thing to another, or changes shape, kind of the same thing. But think of morphing more as like, like you can think of it as like just Transformers, where you have, it's a car at one point, and then it's a robot, at another point, right? So it transforms itself completely. That's what kind of morphing is like. But you wouldn't necessarily, by the way, if you really wanted to do something like that, where you take a car and transform it into a robot type thing, you would probably want to do it through frame by frame animation, not necessarily for morphing. But again, the idea is morphing is that you have one shape and then it changes to another shape, completely different, maybe even a different color. And then the shape hints, basically, it's hard to see. Again, it's basically shape tweening, but you're using these points to help you out to create the shape that you really want. Because what happens sometimes when you do shape tweening, it'll morph into something, or in the process of morphing it from point A to point B, basically it kind of gets all mangled up or something like that. But if you want a more smooth animation, then you would probably want to use shape hints, and you'll see that in your book in a few minutes in terms of setting that up. But again, same thing as before. You have this first page, second page, which is on the second frame. You have all these buttons that go to the different animations. So let's look at the timeline, how that's set up. So as you can see, it's kind of like a staircase type of setup. As I move my playhead, notice it keeps going up and up, right? Depending on how it's set up, you can actually have it going down in terms of the different layers and as you're adding frames. So let me change this to fit in window. So again, as you can see, we're in frame 1. We see the main page right here. Then I move this to frame 2. There's the stop action. Notice there is a lowercase a on here. And by the way, you should put all your action script, frame action script on one layer. Notice that on this one, it's right on the layer where there's an object on there. And that can get, sometimes if you start having problems, it's hard to find where that problem is in your action script. Okay? So it's always a good idea to put all your action script on one layer. And then you can see all the lowercase a's and just go to it and check it out. So anyway, so I'm clicking on that one right there. And you can see there's a stop action there, right? Now if I move my playhead, and here's the first animation. Now it ends right here. And when I scroll down, you'll notice there's another lowercase a there, again indicating that there's an action script. I'm going to click on that. And again, just a stop action. But when I click on the home button, you'll notice we're using action script 2.0 because we're putting the action on the button, right? So it says on release, go to and stop, frame 1. So remember she had it go into frame 1. Then here's the frame by frame animation. So you'll notice you can tell these are frame by frames and these are motion tweening because it's in blue, right? So when I get to here again, same thing. And let's look at this one right here in terms of the action script. You'll notice it says on release, go to and stop frame 2, not frame 1, right? Okay. And then you have some more motion tweening but with text. And then you have right here, what I want you to notice is there's a difference between this color, obviously in this color, and then the way this is set up. Notice that there's an arrow right here. And then if I were to stretch these out, you would see, notice this right here, because there's more frames in between. There's an arrow in there. That's classic tweening. And with classic tweening, you're going to set up a motion guide path. You notice right here, it says motion guide, and this is indented. If you set it up correctly, it will indent in here in terms of the motion guide. And then that means you're going to draw your path. This person drew the path, and that path is in a different layer from the classic tweening. So there's two different ways to set up motion tweening. One is the regular motion tweening, which you've already done. And the second way is classic tweening, the way it used to be. And that works well, though, because when you need a complicated path for something to follow, it needs to be set up this way. Okay? Otherwise, it's going to be a little harder, much harder in terms of setting up. For instance, let's look at this real quick. When I click on the sun, you see that it has a motion path, right? But that motion path is built in. And we can change it around. Right? We can kind of move it around if we needed to. Now the sun will move like that, in that manner, right? So, and each one of these, if it has a blue, if it's shaded in blue, then it's going to be a built-in motion path. But if it's classic tweening, like over here, if it's set up in classic tweening, then you're going to have an arrow and it's shaded purple. So when in your book on the portfolio project, number 7, it asks create a motion path animation. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about creating this right here. Okay. So I want to see a motion path, that you draw your own path, and I'll do a quick little lesson on that real quickly. So anyway, and you'll notice right here the green is shape tweening. So whenever you see green on here, that means it's going to be shape tweening. So there's some kind of shape tweening going on here, in one part or another, and again that indicates that it's shape tweening. But notice that there's a little dots. It should have an arrow. So I probably took away points for the student because the way that that was set up. It should have an arrow going through, like in classic tweening, but it would still be green. And I'll show you again how it should look. Okay, so here's the arrow. There should be an arrow going through there. All right. So again, how many people are doing 3.0, ActionScript 3.0? Okay, there's a few. All right, so let's look at that real quickly. Here's an example of 3.0. So in terms of setting it up, it's going to be pretty much the same as you started. Those people who are doing it in ActionScript 3.0, that all the actions are set up on the top, and this is a good way, the way the student set it up. He's got all the actions on the top, not floating all over the place. Then, if you'll notice again, if we go to the Action tab, it'll show that in frame 1 there's a stop action, then there's the button action right here. Frame 2, again a stop action because it stops it right here. Let me see. Let's do this. So here's the their page. So it stops it on this page, and you'll notice this action right here pretty much repeats itself all the way down. This right here. So you can almost start, you know, again copying and pasting it, and then just basically making sure that your buttons have an instance name and that you're changing the function that you're calling. So notice that function has a different name right here. This function has a different name. And then you define the function right here. And when you define the function, you got to make sure that it's spelled the same way as originally when you call it up. Okay? And so that's what you need to make sure that you set up all throughout. So once you start doing that, it pretty much repeats itself all the way through. So let's look at this real quick. And the timeline is going to be set up the same way. So this person decided to do a different layout. So, you know, and also decided to do it like at the end of the animation for it to jump over to back to, in this case, would be frame 2. So that means that they would use, for instance, at the end of the this animation, there would be a action which would be go to and play, or go to and stop, and then probably be frame 2. So let's see if they did that real quickly. So for instance, at the end of this animation, notice they have go to and stop. You see? So here's the, well, let's find the animation. Here's the animations. He put the animations in folders. I think it's the gears one. So yeah. So again, so here's the gears. Notice the gears are turning. Then it gets to the end of this animation, and you'll notice the action script right here that sends it back to frame 2. And then you have your buttons, as I showed you already, set up so that when they're clicked, they're sending it back to frame 2 or whatever frame you wanted to send it back. Now, let's see here. Yep, that's pretty much it in terms of. So again, here are all your buttons, and here's your action script for those buttons. As I said before, pretty much the same thing. Again, make sure that, as I said before, if I click on this button, notice that here's the instance name for that button. Okay. So again, I'm clicking on the button down at the bottom here, or any buttons. Notice this Kirby button, BTN. So that you got to give it an instance name to be able to use it in your action script. Okay. Now, so okay, I'm going to quickly do. I'll do it in CS6. Quickly do a few samples in terms of motion tweening with which people have a lot of problems with that, and then some shape tweening. I notice people have problems with those particular type of animation. So for instance, here's what I'm talking about in terms of morphing, and also this would be a good example of morph type of animation combined with shape tweening. So as you'll notice, I start off with a rectangle. And here's the thing about when you're doing this, it needs to be the object you're using. You don't want to encase it. You don't want to have a bounding box of, for instance, making it into a symbol. If it's a symbol, you need to break it apart. Okay? So you got to make sure that when you create it, it's still a vector shape. So meaning that I can tug at it and oops. And I can change this. What's going on here?
Transform is.
Here we go. Okay, that didn't work. I'm going to break it apart here. Give me a second. Yeah, what happened is, let me see something real quick. Oh yeah, the object drawing was click. Remember I told you about that if the object drawing is selected, it's going to put a bounding box around it. And that's what I did. And that's why I kept trying to move it and it wouldn't, or change the shape, and I couldn't change the shape. So I'm going to turn this off so when I create my other one, it won't have that bounding box. So notice again now I can change the shape very easily. Okay? All right. And it needs, so again, it needs to be vector shape. All right, so now right here on frame 1, I have my shape. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right mouse click and then create shape tween, for instance. I could do it, there's a number of ways. This is one way we could do this. So when I do that, you'll notice that nothing really happened here, okay? And so now what I need to do, but notice it's green. I need to insert a keyframe. So I'll go to frame, say, 30. And then I'm going to insert, right mouse click, insert a keyframe, or I can hit F6. It's a shortcut. So notice that arrow is drawn all the way through. And this is what I was talking about that student missed. So there needs to be an arrow going through. It needs to be green, and this is shape tween. So when I move it from here to here, nothing happens, right? But if I change the shape, for instance, on the last keyframe right there on frame 30, notice it changes shape. It does the shape tweening. So when I test it out, you'll see something, you know, like that, right? Now, the other thing I could do is, for instance, let me show you real quick. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to hide this layer real quickly right now. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Make sure that the object drawing is turned off. I'm going to go on frame layer 1, and I'm going to click a rectangle. Now, when I draw it, right, as you can see, we get this all filled in because this was already created. This motion tweening or shape tweening was created, and it was from frame 1 to frame 30. So I filled in this from frame 1 to frame 30, the rectangle. Okay. So what I want to do though is I want a different shape on frame 30. So I'm going to select frame 30, and I'm going to create an oval shape, and I'm going to select frame 30. I'm going to insert a keyframe. Or actually, I'm going to insert a blank keyframe. So I'm going to right mouse click, insert blank keyframe. And notice that the object didn't get redrawn again. If I would have inserted a keyframe, it would have redrawn that rectangle. When I put a blank keyframe, it just basically, there's nothing there. It's empty in an empty frame. Yeah. So now I'm going to draw the circle. Hold on, shift key. I'm going to change the color to, let's say, I'm going to change the fill to red. So now, right here in this frame, in this layer, I'm going to right mouse click, and I can select frame 10, frame 15, anywhere in the frames. So I'm going to select it, one frame, right mouse click, and I'm going to select Create Shape Tween. Okay. Notice that frame or layer 1 and 2 look the same, and I just turned it off. It's right here. Okay, so just we can focus on this one. Notice again what's going on. It changes. It goes from a rectangle to a circle, and as it is transitioning from a rectangle to a circle. Also remember, the fill was blue, and the fill on the circle is red, and you can see that transformation in terms of the colors going from blue, purple, and so on to finally red. And then also the transformation of the shape. Okay, so that's what basically basic shape tweening is. Now, and you saw there was two different ways I can do this. So I'm going to create another flash file to show you motion tweening. All right, real quickly. So motion tweening, I'm going to do a rectangle here. In motion tweening, or I should say classic tweening, we already know how to do motion tweening. In classic tweening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shape, create it, make it into a symbol. So I'm going to go to Modify, Convert to Symbol, and that's, you guys should know how to do this already. I'm going to select it as a graphic, change the name to square. And then normally what would happen is, for instance, when you would do regular motion tweening, what you would do is you would select the keyframe, right mouse click, create motion tween, okay? And then you would click and drag the rectangle, and you notice you have a motion path there, right? And then you play it out, and this is what happens. But if you want a more complicated path, and for instance, and I can also change the path a little bit this way, and you know, we could, and the rectangle would do something like that, right? But what I want is, again, to do a very complicated path where it has to just follow it. So to do that, I'm going to do classic tweening. To do classic tweening, I have to insert a keyframe, sort of like the way I did it with the shape tweening. So I'm going to go again to frame, say, 30, and I'm going to insert a keyframe. I insert the keyframe by hitting F6, or right mouse click, insert keyframe, or I can go up to the menu, insert timeline keyframe. Then, notice again, it redraws the square, and I can move the square, for instance, like say that I want it to end up here, and notice as soon as I move it to frame 29, it jumps back over here, right? Because that means that from frame 1 to frame 29, it's in the same position. And in frame 30, as you notice, I moved it, right? Yeah. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right mouse click and select Create Classic Tween. Okay. And keep in mind, I had to first, before I did the Create Classic Tween, I took the object and I converted it to a graphic symbol. In Classic Tween, again, you get the same motion, right? It moves from top to bottom, but when I select it, you notice there's no motion path that you can see, right? There's no motion paths on there. In motion tweening, it created the motion path, which we could kind of modify a bit. So now I want to create my own very complicated path. So I'm going to select that layer, right mouse click, and I'm going to select Add Classic Motion Guide. And keep in mind, I selected this layer. Right mouse clicked on it, and then selected Add Classic Motion Guide. I can't do it anymore because I've already created. So you'll notice that the guide layer has been created. And then this is indented. But there's nothing on there, right? Because in this layer is where I'm going to create my path. All right, so now I'm going to use my pencil for this. I'm going to make sure that I'm not in the layer 1, in this case where my object is. I want to make sure I'm in this layer where there's nothing in there right now. I'm going to select my pencil. Now, under the options, you may want to leave it with the pencil mode straightened. That means as you draw your line, it tries to make straight points. Okay? But what we want is, well, in this case, what I want is smooth points. I want to draw a smooth path as I draw it. So I'm going to select smooth under my options for the pencil. I'm going to put my start my path like right about here. And just do something like that. Okay? So now what should happen is it should snap into it and should follow the path, but notice it's not following the path. Okay? And that may happen. It may happen that you do it one time, bam, it snaps to the path and follows the path, you're done. But if this happens, then you have to do a couple of things. So one of the things I'm going to do is go back to my selection tool, select the object, and notice when I select the object, we see this, what they call a transformation point. And I have to click on the object and make sure it snaps right onto the path, the starting of the path. Okay? So now it's snapped right to there. And I'm going to move it over to the end. And I'm going to select it and move it to right about here. Notice the circle small, the transformation point circle small. When it snaps, it becomes larger. So now I'll move it, and notice it follows the path. You see? Yeah. Now when I test it out, you'll notice that we won't see that path. Notice when I test it, you can't see the path, but it's following that path. And it's a more complicated path. You could do swirls, whatever you need to do, but you can create your own path. Okay, so now what I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to actually point towards the path and then basically follow the path in the way that, like if it was the front of the car or a ship or whatever, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select frame 1 to do that. Select frame 1, and I'm going to go to my Properties tab, and then I'm going to select Orient to Path. Okay? I'm selecting Orient to Path. Now when I move it, notice what it does. It kind of does this type of thing. And the reason it's doing that is because what I need to do is that I need to rotate the object towards the path, the front of the object, which let's consider this the front of the object. So I'm going to use my free transformation tool. Okay, I'm going to click on that, rotate it. So now it's going to follow that path. See how it follows the path now? And then also at the end here, it's kind of a little squirrely because I need to rotate it towards the path also. That now it'll follow it a little bit better. You see? Now, by the way, if I need to slow it down, I can always click and drag this to, say, frame 60. Now, oh man, excuse me, guys. All right, so again, you'll notice that when I did that, when I extended this out, that my path didn't extend out either. So you need to make sure this extends out all the way through frame 60. So to do that, all I'm going to do is select frame 60, right mouse click, and then insert frame. When I do that, then my path goes all the way out to frame 60. And then it'll work for you. Then when I test it out, notice how much slower it goes, because I've extended the path. Okay? So in terms of all this, again, going back to your setup, notice again that it's important that you set up your different animations in different layers, and that when you do that, you're going to continue on down the timeline. And as you continue on down the timeline, you'll be adding layers and the animation. Okay? Any questions? Hopefully this will help you. Again, these two were, I think, are probably usually the most problematic that people have problems with in terms of doing these particular type of animations. I'm going to, as you know, as I'm recording this, and then I'm going to make it available for you guys, so you guys can download if you need to and review it if you get stuck with any one of these type of animations. Okay? No questions?